So I guess with all the interest in new therapies in bladder cancer, there is a very quick increase in the number of clinical trials available, and that can often be a way that patients can access medications that might not be available or funded by the government. So immunotherapy is part of a lot of those trials. The benefits to clinical trials is that it does allow you early access to those medications that you couldn't otherwise get access to. But a clinical trial is essentially an experiment of a new treatment. And most of the time it's comparing the standard treatment, which might be a type of chemotherapy, to immune therapy. And as a patient going on to those, you won't know which treatment you're getting sometimes. So occasionally that you are told which treatment you're getting, but a lot of the time everyone's blind, including the doctor, to what you're actually getting, so that there can be a true comparison of the two treatments. Other benefits could be is you tend to get very close follow-up. So that can be that you might see the doctors and the nursing staff more often. You'll often get a care coordinator who makes sure that you turn up to your scans and your blood's on time and everything's done in a very orderly fashion. And it's actually been shown that people that participate in clinical trials tend to have a slightly better outcome. Whether that be because they're possibly the kind of person who wants to actively look for other treatments, or does it mean having extra treatments are better? We're not sure. But they're not for everybody. It can be that some people are quite nervous about the prospect of getting a treatment that might not yet be proven. And I know there's always a question about what happens if I get a placebo or I don't get a real drug. And there's not many trials that are done like that anymore, unless there's no other option. So if you've had 3 or 4 different chemos and there's nothing else that you can have other than a trial, sometimes that might be compared to placebo because there's not another treatment available anyway. But the majority of the time it would be compared to what the normal treatment is now. So I think there's far less of those placebo trials being done. So there's 2 different ways to get funding with a clinical trial. A lot of the time it is funded by a pharmaceutical company who has discovered a new drug and tested it in the lab or on a small number of people to show that it might be beneficial. So they then roll it out and say, look, we need to try this in a lot more people to see if it really is helpful. And if that's the case, patients and the government don't pay for that treatment. It's really funded by the pharmaceutical company. If some of the treatment is a standard chemo, then that would just be funded as per the normal mechanisms by the government. But the trial drugs would not be at any cost to someone being involved. So there's not really a lot of out-of-pocket costs for a patient going on a trial, and in fact sometimes there's less. Predominantly people would get onto a clinical trial through discussion with one of their doctors, usually one of the oncologists. Sometimes the surgeons might be involved in the earlier stage trials, or patients are becoming very researched and aware themselves, and sometimes people come to see me and will say, I've read about this trial, what do you think? And because there's such a rapid turnover and they're different at every single centre and hospital, we might not always know exactly what was just became available 2 weeks ago at a different centre to where we work. But most of the time it's that I kind of think in advance. You're seeing someone having their first line of chemo and you think, oh, okay, there's a point that this might not be working anymore. And you start to do a bit of research and reading and what might be next, and trying to bring those discussions in while they're still having, their first round of treatment. But they do change very frequently. People do travel interstate and overseas for clinical trials. It may well be something that the doctors in Sydney that we might not actually know a hell of a lot about. So I try to encourage people to get as much information as they can first, whether that be contact that centre, whether it be America or wherever they want to go, and try and get at least some basic information about the trial, so we can talk about whether we think it's a suitable thing, and make sure then not possibly ignoring or not having a very proven treatment to go and do something that's quite radical. But yeah, and most of those kind of going overseas would be that a patient's heard about it or been told about it and brings it to us. Yeah, so for a drug to move from a trial situation through to a funded treatment would be that it has been proven to be either equally effective or better than what the current treatments are. Usually that's in something what's called a phase 3 trial, and phase 3 is when you're testing 2 drugs basically head-to-head, one against the other, and quite often that is an international trial where many countries would be involved. And you'd usually need at least a couple of years of follow-up beyond when the treatment was to say, look, yep, this treatment was more effective or is equally effective. And then the government will look at whether unfortunately often comes down to the cost, still a cost effectiveness. Is this treatment, how much better is it? But is it a lot more expensive? Really, once something's been proven to be considerably more effective, it can still take a year or 2. for that to become available as something that we can prescribe for someone